Boker Tov. It's a great honor for me to be speaking in a forum like this. My name is Rabbi Krengel. Region from? You got my accent? Anyone? Which country? Lekker, man. Joburg. Any other South Africans here? No? Anyway, I originally came from South Africa. Came to the Gush in '88. A couple of years after the head of Torah Metzion. You know him, Zev Schwartz. He was a few years ahead of me. Also from Johannesburg. I ended up learning in Gush. I was able to learn at the Rav Lichtenstein, who will quote some of his stuff. And then in 20,000, I went on Shlichut. I was Rosh Kollel in Johannesburg. I started my involvement in Torah Metzion. I've continued with the next generation. I've got a daughter on Shlichut in Melbourne. Any Aussies here? No? Oh, there you go. Which city? Melbourne, there you go. So my daughter's in Melbourne right now, working in Yavna. Currently, I am the director of the English department at Machon Tzomet. You guys are, I'm sure, familiar with Machon Tzomet. We're coming on 50 years with Rabbi Rosen. I'm sure some people there even remember him as an amazing personality. I got to learn from him straight. Torah and technology. Tzomet is literally Tzivtei Madava Torah. So there's engineers and there's rabbis. I'm obviously on the rabbinic side. I'm on the educational side. We have a whole educational center today with programs. We have a lovely visitor center. If you guys ever want to come.
A great tour.
Oh, you've done it already. I did it, or was somebody else? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
When was it?
Maybe about 3-4 years
ago. Okay, you came with your family.
No, with another couple.
Another couple. We do couples, families. I do this thing now. I don't know if you heard about this. Ketanat Sus. You heard about it? Saba v'Savta. The grandparents bring all the grandkids in the kite Sus. In English, it's Buzz, Bobby and Zadie. Anyway, okay. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. Baruch Hashem, 6 kids, 2 grandchildren. So Baruch Hashem. When they called me up, and like I say, it's wonderful to be in a forum like this. When they called me up, and Daniela said to me, "There's so many things," and this is part of the issue. This is part of the beauty. There's so many different things happening in this time. We just had Lag Bomer, it's Parshat Bahar, Eretz Yisrael. But I was thinking, we literally a week away from Yom Yerushalayim. And I figured most of you live in Yerushalayim. Is that true? Everyone here lives in Yerushalayim? Yeah. No, okay. Pretty much. How many people were here from before 67? Anyone? Anyone is in Eretz Yisrael before? No? Everyone's post 67. Okay. But you live in Yerushalayim. Of course, I live in Gush Etzion. I came to Har Etzion in Alon Shved and I stayed. Oh, you guys I know. You have a son, no? Yeah. Wolf. Yeah, we were together in Gush together. His son was with me. He had 2 sons in Gush with me, no? Yeah. Mazal Tov on the wedding. His granddaughter was supposed to get married the day the war started. She ended up getting married. Isru Chag. Mazal Tov. I figured, I live in Gush Etzion. In my opinion, Gush Etzion is the greater Jerusalem area. But I thought, as people who live in Yerushalayim, this would be a nice opportunity to explore on a deeper level. I was told that this is a forum that really likes to go a little deeper into the sources, into the things. You can see the source sheet, everything's with Hebrew and English. I'll put the English there if you ever want to share it with others. We will go through the sources in Hebrew with translation and we'll get through Be'ezrat Hashem, everything. I want to start with a story. Have you guys all seen this book, Rav Ruskin? Listening to God. If you haven't read it, very, very worthwhile reading. I've read it maybe 3 times already. I happen to have also worked with Darkani. You guys heard of Darkani? It's a special needs program that Rav Ruskin was the one who took it on. The girls in Linderbaum, the boys in Gush. So I worked with Rav Ruskin. I also took a Shlichut training program before I went on Shlichut with Rav Ruskin. So this is a book of all stories from his life. He calls it Inspirational Stories for My Grandchildren, from growing up in America in the late 40s, 50s. YU, he talks a lot about Rav Soloveitchik. His work in Russia, he was one of the first people in the 70s to go into Russia. Him building up Lincoln Square. Anyone here from Lincoln Square? No? Yeah? You were there in his town? In Rav Ruskin's town? Oh, so I'm sure have you read the book? It's very interesting.
He met me and he said, "I'm leaving."
But you came with him. He brought people with him.
40 years later.
A bit later. You followed him a little bit later. And then he talks in the book a lot about building up a front. Anyway, one of the things he talks about is when he came to Israel, it was different in those days. It wasn't really straight out of high school. He had finished college and he came to Israel from the years 59 to 60. And being Rav Riskin, if you people are familiar with him, he had a very varied year. He started his year in Elul in Ponyovich. Can you imagine? From YU, he decided to go to Ponyovich. He talks about meeting Rav Kahneman, who later on had a connection with him. He spent his he spent Elul in Ponyovich. He spent his Chorif, the winter semester in Hebrew University, taking different courses. And he finished up his summer Zman in Kerem B'Yavneh. So he really got the full gamut from Haredi Yeshiva University to the first original Hesed Yeshiva, right? Kerem B'Yavneh was the first Hesed Yeshiva. So he talks about while he was in the Hebrew University and the different courses that he took and lots of different famous professors. And he took a class in Gospels in ancient Greek. If people know Rav Riskin, familiar with his working, he was very into lots of ancient philosophies and stuff. And he describes who was in this class in Hebrew University in 1960 on Gospels in ancient Greek. So he said the first person was a Eged bus driver. Can you imagine? He's like, only in Israel. I don't know about it anymore, but definitely in 1960, you would have an Eged bus driver on the side who's taking a course in ancient Greek. He said there was a nun from Germany who kept to herself completely. She would sit at the corner of the lecture room. And then there was this brother Yohanan, he calls him, a monk from one of the monasteries in the area. And they were all taking this course together. And he talks about how him and brother Yochanan became friends, and they were similar age, and they would go on Tiolim together and go see things and do stuff together. And he kept sharing with brother Yochanan one of his biggest frustrations of coming to Israel in 59-60 and not being able to go to the Kotel. And he talks about how he, go to the Mandelbaum Bridge. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, you can the gate. You can go and look and see and try and, but it's a reality. I was born in 1970, so I came into the world post 67. I came into a world where we already had the Kotel, and that's why for me this story was such a powerful story, because it's and it's not that long ago. Okay, it's not that long ago. That people, you could come to Eretz Yisrael, you could come to Yerushalayim, but you couldn't go to the Kotel, that spot. And there was something that for Rav Riskin was a very, very difficult part of the year, being in Yerushalayim, but not being able to go to the Kotel. So after a while, brother Yohanan says to him, "Hey, I've got an idea. You got an American passport, right?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "So, you know what? The Easter pilgrimages are coming up. Bring your passport on this day and this day, and we'll fill out a form, and I'll get you into the Kotel." Wow, Rav Riskin was like, wow, this is like the highlight of his year. He describes in the book, if people know the way Rav Riskin talks and speaks, he really describes it. He couldn't sleep the whole night. He was so excited. He gets to the place. Brother Yohanan comes, checks his passport, makes sure that there's no indication in his passport that he's actually Jewish. And then he gives him the form. And you guys are familiar with forms. How many forms? Today everything's digital, right? But you remember the old day when you would write out forms, your name, your number, your passport number, What's the bottom line? I am a practicing Christian with ... to sign. He had to sign. And he's finished. He looks at Brother Yohanan. He's like, I can't do this. And Brother Yohanan says to him, come on, just sign, I'm not baptizing you. He's like, what do you mean? If you know Rav Riskin also, he's connected to history. He starts talking about all the Christian anti-Semitism and the Crusades and the Inquisition and the Holocaust and everything. And Brother Yochanan's going white at this point. He's like, but I don't understand. You're learning Gospels with me. I think he maybe thought he was interested in Christianity. He's like, I'm only learning Gospels because Jesus was a Jew, and he was, and I'm interested in how this all came about. So apparently he describes it in the book, that's funny. Brother Yohanan tears up the form, disappears. He said he never spoke to him again. They would see each other in class, never speak. The postscript to that story is actually very interesting. The nun from Germany at the end of the year, approaches Rav Ruskin, and the first time she speaks to him, and she's like, I want to convert, which is interesting. She basically said she grew up with the Christian philosophy that God had chosen the Jewish people, but then he abandoned the Jewish people, and that's why they were destined to be homeless and destitute, and he chose a new Messiah. And she's like, I'm living in Israel, this is even 60, right? It's not even today, and it's thriving, and the Jews are coming back, so I realized it was wrong, and the original covenant with the Jewish people is correct, and I want to become Jewish. He put her in touch with people. He said a couple of years later he was in Meisharim. She was married to a chassid with 3 kids, but he said the same head covering. Can you imagine? Just like she was a nun. Anyway, so that's a postscript. So this story, for me at least, I know some of you, I'm sure some of you all seem very young, but I'm sure some of you do remember those events of 1967. And besides, from what I've understood, the way it felt like before, and the way they were, burying so many, digging so many graves, really thinking it was going to be an absolute disaster, and then really in 6 days, and the miracle that happened, and apparently this is a legend that goes by that in West Point, the Army Academy in America, they teach war and strategies, and they actually focus on the Israeli wars. And I heard this from somebody that when they come to the 6-day war, they said, we can't study this. And the students were like, why? It's like, this is miracles. This is beyond army strategy here. So we're all familiar with this. And like I say, some of you, I'm sure, will remember these events. But what Rav Ruskin's story does for me is make us realize how grateful we are and how honored we are after 2,000 years. Yes, it is true that before 48 people did go to the Kotel, but you see the pictures, right? It was like the small little space, and it also wasn't so easy, and there was a lot of difficulties. There's another famous legend of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the Balakuzari, coming and being trampled. Whether it's true or not, historians argue, but it's a legend which is based on reality, that people would yearn to come to Yerushalayim, and they would come, and often it would land up in disaster. And we, as Orches, you just get on a bus or walk, which is actually better in Yerushalayim, right? You just walk, forget the train. The train's pretty good. Get the light rail, and you're there, and it's beautiful. And one of the things I do on the side, if anyone ever needs, is bar mitzvahs at the Kotel, and it's really, really special. I basically take bar mitzvah boys from all over the world, and I say to them, I give them an analogy. It's like watching a game on television or being in the stadium. When you're doing a bar mitzvah at the Kotel, you are in the stadium. It's the real deal. So I thought we would explore together a little bit about Yerushalayim and the importance of this exact spot, just like Rav Ruskin was saying. He could be in the larger Jerusalem area, it could be in Israel, but there's something specific about this spot. Just in general, I think it also fits into, like I said, everything that happens in this time of the year. I think it's fascinating. One of the courses I've developed over the years is Magal HaShana and the yearly cycle and the Chagim. And it's just mind-blowing how much we have in this 7-week period. Every single week is something else. Have you noticed? For people involved in the school systems, it's very, very hard, right? Because every single week the kid's off. Basically, and it's layers, which I think is also interesting. You have, obviously, the original layer of this time period is from the Torah, the process from Yitzit Mitzrayim, which Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in his Chorev talks about as the physical creation of Am Yisrael, and then the building up, the 7 weeks, to Shavuot, which is the spiritual creation of Am Yisrael. But the next layer of history is obviously Lag BaOmer and the Avelut aspect in Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, which is interesting that it fits there. But the modern day level is fascinating. I was just reading, I'm sure you guys see the HaMizrahi, the publication, and they actually quoted, obviously an older article from Rav Jonathan Sachs, and he was talking about it's the first time in 2,000 years we have new Chagim. Now whether people hold by these Chagim or not, that's a whole machloket, but all of a sudden we never had that before, where in the same time period between Pesach and Shavuot we have a couple of days, and it's also a process. We have Yom HaShoah, which is in itself the whole machloket, Chavza in Nisan, and the also Ghetto, and it's still in Nisan, and there's still a whole debate about that today, but that is what happened. We have Yom HaShoah, and I personally think there's a process there. There's also, it's a parallel process to the original creation of Am Yisrael, to now the process of the suffering, just like the suffering in Mitzrayim, perhaps a lot more, the suffering in the Holocaust. moving into Yom HaZikaron, which is Daled, and I'm come Gush Etzion. Daled is because that's the day Kfar Etzion fell. That was the original thing of, by the way, the flyover always comes past the Gush, and then it comes to Har Herzl. So we had Yom HaZikaron, and then we have Yom HaTzmaut. But all of that is I think, parallel to Pesach, which is more the physical creation, the recreation of Am Yisrael back in its new country. And once again, for those 19 years, people could not go to the Kotel. There's a famous recording of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook saying, "What's going to be with the Kotel and Hebron and all these places?" And then 19 years later, Dafka, a week before Shavuot. So I think there's really a parallel between these two different levels here, three levels. A week before Shavuot, we have the reunification of Yerushalayim. The Kotel, by the way, also Gush Etzion and Hebron was the next day. So it's all these places. But the most important is we go back to that spot, and exactly a week later, there's a lot of reports of that was the first time people came to on Chag Shavuot. So what I want to try and do is do a little bit of a chronological history of this place and the different things that happened in this place, because the events that happened in Yerushalayim and the way it's referred to is obviously what's going to help us get to a deeper understanding of what is Yerushalayim all about. I want to start with stage one, which is the creation of the world, and this obviously is not in the Pshat. The creation of the world in itself is basically, you have the two prakim, right, Aleph and Bet, and the whole thing, and Rav Soloveitchik. I'm sure people are familiar with the original Rosh Yeshivas of Yeshivat Har Etzion, Rav Amital, Zichrono Livracha. He used to say, creation, you can't really understand it, what's written there, and it's very esoteric. But obviously what's interesting is the Midrashic material, and there's a beautiful Midrash quoted here in Tanchuma. The Midrash is based on the Pasuk. So let's start with the Pasuk. It's a Pasuk in Tehillim, Perik Nun, right in the beginning of Perik Nun. Mizmor, this first source here, number one. Mizmor la'asaf kel Elokim, Hashem diber veikra aretz memizrach shemesh ad mavo'o. So the pasuk is saying Hashem spoke, okay, and called to the earth. It's very interesting imagery here. We know that is how Hashem created the world, and that's an interesting thing. And the Mishnah in Perek Abba says be'asara mamarot, in other words, with sayings. Human beings have to create with their hands, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally created the world with words. He said that he or, and there was or, etc., etc., etc. So here, the pasuk is kind of summarizing the whole thing. Hashem called to the earth, and it should be from Mizrach Hashemesh, from the rising to the setting, meaning literally from east to west, the whole world. But the next pasuk, and this is really what you'll see, the Midrashic literature picks up, Mitzion. In other words, this idea of creation is automatically in the pasuk, even it is in the pasuk, connected to Tzion, Michlal, Yofi, which includes all beauty, right? This is also based on another Gemara tradition, that 10 measures of beauty came down to the earth, 9 in Yerushalayim, that's why Yerushalayim is so beautiful, and all the people in Yerushalayim are so beautiful, and the rest was given to the rest of the world. Now the last, sorry, I just noticed the ayin got cut off. Sorry, how did that happen? Okay, when I was transferring it, obviously it's supposed to read Mitzion Michlal Yofi Elokim Hofia. There's supposed to be an ayin. You can add it in if you have a pen. It's supposed to be an ayin at the end of that word. Hashem appears, which is also very interesting. In other words, if we just look at the pshat level, we're talking here about creation of the world, the whole world, connecting to Tzion, which incorporates beauty, and the appearance of Hashem. So it's an interesting combination of different things. The two different sources that deal with it. I want to focus on the famous Midrash in Tanchuma. You see the number Yud. I highlighted the part. Did the highlighting work on your? Yeah, pretty good. Okay. Sometimes when you copy it. Let's start with the beginning. It says here, the first highlighted part. I'm just reading the highlighted parts. There is on the flip side the English as well, so you have it. Shlomo was a great wise person. He's the one that built the Beit HaMikdash. He knew the foundation of the world. Lama, and here is where the Midrash quotes the pasuk Mitzion Michlal Yofi Elokim Hofia. Oh, there you see the ayin. Mitzion, and this is what's important. Mitzion nit chalel kol haolam kulo. Okay, when the pasuk says Mitzion Michlal, the Midrash is telling us Nish tachlel kol haolam kulo. This spot incorporates the whole world. the klal, is a spot, but it really incorporates the whole world. Kidetanin, and here it brings a famous Mishnah. I'll discuss it in a second. Lama nikret shema even shtiya. As we know, the stone was called the even shtiya. Shememena hushtat haolam, because from there the world was created. This, by the way, what it's referring to here is a Mishnah in Yoma. That's the other source about this concept. I show it specifically in the Midrash because you'll see it's a little bit more fleshed up. But there's a Mishnah in Masechet Yoma which makes sense because Yoma deals with the Seder Avodah of Yom Kippur, which is the one day of the year that the Kohen Gadol actually goes into the spot. It's the holiest day. The holiest person goes into the spot of the Kodesh Kodeshim. And the Mishnah there, the Gemara on this is Yoma Nun Dalet. The Mishnah is 2 pages before Nun Bet. The Mishnah talks about that once there was no more Aron Kodesh, referring to in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, when there was no Aron Kodesh, so what was there? The Even HaShtiyah, this foundation stone, was there. And that's what the Mishnah says. The Gemara, so it's a Gemara in Yoma Nun Daled Amud Bet, quotes, why is it called Even HaShtiyah? And that's what it's referring to when it says here, this is what is learned, it's referring to that. It says, Likret Shema Even Shtiyah Shememene Hushtat Olam. Now, in the Gemara in Yoma, which is interesting, there's actually a machloket. In the Mishnah, it's not brought down as a machloket. In the Gemara, it's brought down as a machloket. Where was the world created from? So this is the Gemara says, the Mishnah is based on this opinion. The world was created from this spot of the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Even HaShtiyah. There's a second opinion in the Gemara, which is very interesting. The world was created from its ends. Now, what that means is also difficult to understand. All of it, like I say, we don't understand creation, but it's 2 opposite opinions. And I think the Gemara there quotes this pasuk to show it must be from Yerushalayim, Ki mitzion michlal yofi. But if you think in the pasuk before, V'ikra aretz memizrach Hashemesh ad mavo'o is kind of incorporating the other opinion. Either way, the Mishnah here is sticking with the opinion that the world was created from this spot. If you move over to the next highlighted part in the Mishnah, Keshem shahat tabur hazeh natun be'emsa ish. Here is really the part, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's quite an often quoted analogy, but this is the source for it, and that's why I chose the Midrash and not the Gemara. The Midrash says it's like the umbilical cord, the belly button, tabur. What's the proper medical word? What? Navel, thank you. The navel, the belly button. Okay. And the Midrash actually quotes a separate passage, which is interesting. Okay. Keshem shahatabur hazeh natun be'emtza ish. Just like your navel is right in the middle of your body. Kach Eretz Yisrael netuna be'emtza olam. What's interesting is the Midrash now is referring to Eretz Yisrael in general, but Eretz Yisrael is in the center of the world. Now this Mikhlal is an interesting concept, because what's the center of the world? The world is round anywhere. Some people say Australia could be the center of the world, right? Why is Australia in the map always over there? Or South Africa's over here, whatever it is. But there's a lot of different things. And that famous old map, right, of the different continents, and Jerusalem's in the middle. And also nature. And you might be familiar with this, the birds, right? The birds that are coming from where I'm from. There's beautiful birds in South Africa, by the way. And they fly when it gets too cold there. They fly, and they always fly through Israel to Europe, which is interesting. In other words, even in nature, there's this concept that the Ramban also brings this up, that it's Emtsa'ut HaOlam, that we are, Eretz Yisrael is the center of the world. And what's beautiful in the description in the Midrash is how it continues. So it says, just like the navel is in the middle of the world, of a human being, it takes this analogy. This, by the way, is another big analogy, that in different Midrashim, that the world is analogy to the human body. Okay, so here we have the navel is in the middle of the world, and Eretz Yisrael is in the middle, and it quotes a pasuk from Yechezkel. Shene'emar Yoshvei al tabur haaretz. They were living on the navel of the world. Okay, which is Eretz Yisrael. Umimena mashitach shalom olam yosei, because just like Shene'emar mizmor la'asaf, and it quotes the pasuk we had in Tehillim, Minan Mitzion Michlal Yof Elokim Hofia. Okay, in other words, what the Midrash wants to do is as follows. It's not just that your navel happens to be in your middle of your body. That is the beginning of your being. You know, when we think about the whole process of a baby starting and developing, right, is from the navel cord, which is getting its nourishment from the mother while it's in the womb, and then it becomes a human being. Once it's born, Okay, the part of the birth process is in cut. I was, as a father, I was very into this. Some fathers don't actually literally cut the umbilical cord for all 6 of my children, and that's now there's a being, but that point on our bodies is always a reminder of where we came from, and the one who gave birth to us, as it was, which is our mother, etc., etc. So what the Midrash wants to do is a similar kind of thing. In other words, this is the spot that the world was created from, and then from there went outwards to the whole world. And what's interesting here, once again, the Midrash talks about these concentric circles, which you're going to see later in the Gemara as well, which you're also familiar with, right? Eretz Yisrael yoshevet be'emtzuto shel ha'olam. Eretz Yisrael, like we said, is in the middle of the world. I'm on the third last line here. Yerushalayim be'emtzaita shel Eretz Yisrael. Yerushalayim is in the middle of Eretz Yisrael. That is true. It is. Okay, and there's a lot to that. In other words, as you know, we're in the mountains, we're in the middle, right? It's colder here. Okay, you go down literally 20 minutes, and you're already in a totally different thing that's down by the sea on either side. Okay, you know, and you can stand in certain places, at least in Gush Etzion, you can stand on a clear day on Shivat Har Etzion and see down to the sea on the one side, the Mediterranean Sea, and the beautiful Jordan Mountains, which you see from Yerushalayim, but also on a clear day, right? You see the Harei Moab. So we are literally in the middle of Eretz Yisrael. Beit HaMikdash be'emtza Yerushalayim. The Beit HaMikdash in the middle of Heichal be'emtza Beit HaMikdash. The actual building is divided. The Heichal is in the middle of Aron be'emtza Heichal, and Aron is right there. Ve'emet shtiyah lifnei Aron. And the way it was when there was an Aron, the emet shtiyah was right in front of the Aron Kodesh. Shemimene nishtat ha'olam v'shlomi ha'chacham amad al shorashim yotzim mimene lekol olam. He knew. The Midrash didn't quote us. He knew exactly from there where everything went out, and therefore what vein would be right to plant this thing and that thing, and that's the Chokhmah of Shlomo. Anyway, this is the Midrash, and this is stage one. Stage one is creation of the world. Now, obviously, once again, we don't understand creation of the world, but why does the Midrash want to tell us that this is where the world was created from? The other opinion in the Gemara is saying he created like, what does this mean? So obviously, what it means, just like I described with the birth of a human being, you have a mother who gives birth to you, and then from that point you now become your own being. So obviously the idea is that Kadosh Baruch Hu, and once again, why do we not understand creation of the world? Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu is all spiritual, right? One of the 13 principles of faith, and Oguf, Hashem is not physical, and He doesn't have any physical concepts, and somehow He created this physical world, right? I'm not into Kabbalah, I don't learn Kabbalah. Most of us are not yet old enough, right? You have to be 40 to learn Kabbalah. But the bottom line is, the Kabbalah talks of the concept of Tzimtzum, which I think in this case does help us understand that Hashem had to literally, what's the best translation for Tzimtzum? Like contract Himself, create a space to allow the physical world to be created. So that started at a certain point. So that point, just like the navel, becomes the connection to Hashem and the spiritual world, and then from there the rest of the physical world. So the further you are from the spot, the less spiritual it's going to be. It's funny, I actually happen to have a daughter right now who lives in Hawaii, which is the exact, anyone been to Hawaii? Hawaii is the exact opposite point of Eretz Yisrael. It's exactly 12 hours. It's exactly 12 hours. Now it's 13 because of this hour. I'm just thinking that's the furthest point you can get to. But, and they're bringing Kedusha. She says to me, the Chabad Shaliach Onela said, this is Eliyahu's final stop, right? Because if he starts in Melbourne, right, where my other daughter is, he ends his night in Hawaii. So we are bringing Kedusha to all the corners of the earth, and that is Torah Metzion. But, let's talk about that. Torah Metzion is in all places of the world, but we have Torah Metzion in Yerushalayim, which is very important, because we want to be in the source. We want to be connected to the source as it goes out to other places. So this is the beginning of that moment where Hashem, on the spiritual level, creates a physical world, and it remains, just like the navel remains the point of the meeting between Shamayim Va'aretz, the heavens and the earth. And that brings us to stage two. What is stage two? What is the next event on the spot? And this is what's interesting. We're going to go back to the Avot. We've now moved from creation to all three Avot have a connection to this place. The next event is really Avraham and Yitzchak and the Akedah, which is very interesting. So if we take a look at source number 3, the famous psukim in the beginning of in the beginning of the Perek of the Akedah, which is the end of Parshat Be'erah. ויהי אחר הדברים האלה ולוקים ניסת אברהם ויאמר אליו אברהם ויאמר הנני. This is the first הנני. There's many who followed in that path of using that word. Rashi describes it's like, on the one hand humility, but on the other hand willingness to just, okay, I'm here, God, whatever you want me to do. What is interesting is straight away we have pasuk bet ויאמר קח נא את בנך את יחידך Asher ahavta, take your son, your only son, and Rashi explains why I had to spell it out, because he also has Yishmael at this point. Asher ahavta et Yitzchak, and then this is the part I highlighted here, V'lech lecha al eretz ha-moriah, v'alehu sham le'olah, alecha ta'arim asher omar alecha. So first of all, okay, once again, my training in Gush, and I'm sure you guys are all familiar, I got to learn directly from Rav Mordechai Broya. I don't know if anyone else actually ever heard him speak. He was unbelievable. He was the first one of the Shtei Bechinot and analyzing Tanakh and looking at the words. And from there, Rav Yol Ben Nun, if you guys are familiar with, and then Rav Menachem Litag. So I got to soak in a lot of this. And obviously, Milah Mancha, obviously when a word comes up and you've got to stop and you've got to think about it. And this Lech Lecha, we know is from the beginning of Sipur Avram and Sarah. Now, if we look at the structure, it's another thing I got from Gush, looking at the superstructure of Bereshit. If you have creation, which is setting up this ideal, what the world is about, and once again, adding to this midrash, we have Jerusalem in the middle and the connection to the physical and the spiritual, beautiful. If you think about what happens after those first two prakim in Bereshit, it seems to be this downward trend of mankind, starting with the first chet, Adam v'Chava, moving down to the first murder, kind of Hevel, and then of course the complete deterioration to Dor HaMabul, everything that went along with Noach and the flood and everything else. That's not the lowest point. The lowest point was actually Migdal Bavel. And it's Yud Aleph of Bereshit, which is the story of Migdal Bavel. It's kind of like, even though it's not complete destruction, but it's the lowest point, and it's out of Migdal Bavel that we then have the Sipur Avot. So if we think of Bereshit as like this ideal and kind of moving down, then out of that, and once again we get a sense of what we're talking about. So Hashem created this world. It was a physical world that was supposed to always be connected to spirituality. That's a challenge. That is a challenging thing for human beings to keep connecting. It seemed to be moving downwards, and who comes along? Abraham. And the famous thing about we the chosen people, did Hashem choose us or did we choose Hashem? I'm the first one to say, and there's the famous Midrashim, right? That he looked at the sun and then he looked at the moon, and the famous Midrash that said it's like somebody comes to this beautiful home, and it says it must be somebody who built this home, and that was Avram Avinu. He was the one that was able to connect to this idea that, hang on a second, this beautiful physical structure must have come from somewhere, must be connected to something beyond what our eyes are seeing. And that's why he's sitting out there in Ur Kasdim, and which today is Iran, correct? It's like that. Iraq? I can't remember exactly which one. Which one? Iraq. He's out there in Iraq. And by the way, I totally enjoy if there's questions and input, and feel free. He's out there in Iraq, and then all of a sudden, Hashem appears, and this is another whole question in the Mefarshim over there. It's like when you're little and you go to Cheder, whatever it is. I did go to a Cheder. That's what we called it in those days. And they tell you, Abraham, and all these stories, and his father's idol shop, and all these things. Like, wow, lots of cool stories about Abraham when he was a kid. And you open up the Torah, and what's the first thing? Lech Lecha. As we know, in other words, the opening of the whole section of, I'll just read it from the inside. The whole section of the Avot, the whole beginning of Am Yisrael, if you want to call it that, starts with these very interesting psukim that seem difficult. The Mefarshim discuss it. Like, how is this the beginning of Am Yisrael? How is this the beginning of our story, the world story? Oh, sorry, I don't know why. Why is this on? Sorry, I apologize. I thought I had turned this down. It's a new phone, so I'll just 1 second. Okay. So, Vayom Hashem al Abraham lech lecha. Okay, and if you look at these psukim, they're very parallel. Okay, the pasuk we just quoted from the end of his story. In other words, the Bereshit is then subdivided. The story of the Avodah is subdivided into Sipur Avram and Yitzchak, which is these two parshas Lech Lecha ve'era. Sipur Yitzchak doesn't really have much space, and that in itself is a whole Torah. We don't know much about Yitzchak. He's just the continuity. He's just the. It's just one perek Chavav is dealing with Yitzchak, and then of course we have two parshiot of Sipur Yaakov, and Bereshit ends off with 4 parshiot of Bnei Yaakov in the beginning of Am Yisrael and the Shvatim. But if we once again look at this parallel between the very beginning of Sipur Avram Yitzchak and the conclusion of Avram Yitzchak, it's these two parallel psukim, because that's what it's Lech Lecha, okay? And we know, I'm sure you're familiar, there's a whole question, what is Lech Lecha? What does it go to you, basically? So the Rashi explains for you, right? Lahanatcha, letovatcha. But there is a lot of Torah. The first person I see discuss it was the Torah to Moshe, the Alshich, who actually says literally go to your true self, which is interesting. In other words, he's telling Abraham, if you really want to go to your true spiritual self, you have, the Sfat also talks about it in the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there's quite a lot that go in that direction. We're talking about, we love to say, also like, Torah Mitzion, and you're out there and you're meeting these people and you say, you've got to come to Israel because that's where you'll, discover your true self. It sounds like a cliche, but it's actually what the pasuk is saying. It's actually what Hashem is saying to Abraham. Go to Eretz Yisrael, and then you'll connect to your true spiritual self. And what's interesting in that pasuk, it's also very vague about where he's coming from, right? But al Eretz Hashem Ereka. Sorry, that way around. Meaning it's very clear where you're coming from. You're coming from your land where you're born. Okay. It's very clear, Ma'artacha, where you were born, from your parents' home. Okay, whenever I'm working with students, I like to tell them, if you think about it, we're reliving this. That's what it is. Actually, talk about Darkeni. I had a Darkeni student who once said to me, oh yeah, we did this. We also we came on El Al, so it's just what Abraham and Sarah did. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said it was called El Al Gamal. That's what my student said. And then he gets in front of the class and does this whole rendition. Hi, this is your captain speaking. Welcome to El Al Gamal. Please tighten your seatbelts. It's going to be very bumpy. so I often think about that but it is, and I think for all of us who've made Aliyah from different places, for you it's your parents, right? It's something to think about. We talk about Ma'aseh Abatim Lebanon. We literally follow the footsteps of Abraham, but making this journey from Ur Kasdim to Eretz Yisrael, and then everything that happens in Abraham and Sarah's life. But the end of the story is this: Hashem now saying to Abraham, take Yitzchak, and here it's also, right, it's very clear who Yitzchak is. It's Et Bincha Yichidcha Shahavta V'lech Lecha L'Eretz Hamorea V'lo Sham Le'olah Lecha Davim Hashem. The same thing, like go to Eretz Yisrael and I'll show you where the land is, and the Midrash can pick up on that. It's like to test him, right? So if a friend comes up to you and says, Yalla, you got to help me. Come, we're going. What's the first question? Where are we going? And where? And we'll only agree to go if he can tell us exactly where we're going. That's what happened. That's the beauty of it. Hashem was saying, Avraham, come with me. In both journeys, come with me. I'll show you where the land is. And he followed him. And now he's down there in Beersheba, right? And he's saying, come, I'll show you where we're going to go. And he went with him. By the way, he went down Derech Avot. If people have been, that's right by us in Gush Etzion. So first of all, that's the structure here of Sipur Avram, the coming to the Eretz, the circles we saw in the Midrash, coming to the general place of Eretz Yisrael, just like Am Yisrael, and coming in 48, and only at its latest stage in 67. So we're really following in those footsteps. We get to Yerushalayim. So the other thing is the name given here. The name Yerushalayim, as we know, is only a name that comes up later. It comes up in Nach. It does not come up in the Torah. But what name is used here? Eretz HaMoriah. And that's why it's called Har HaMoriah. So why is it called this? And obviously, Kishmo Kain Hu, a name, and the first time, by the way, this is very important, the first time a name is used in the Torah is an expression. The first time something is given a name in the Torah is an expression of what it's about. So what's interesting, there's the Gemara. There's the Gemara, if you look at source number 4, it's Gemara in Ta'anit, Tet Zayin. There's a machloket. Always, right? No, of course. My Haramoriya. So the Gemara asks our question. Why is the Torah all of a sudden using this term? Like as if we know it. What is it? So Pligi Bey Rabbi Levi Bachama v'Rabbi Chanina. It's two opinions. Chad Amar Har Shiyatz'a Mimenu Hora'a LeYisrael. So the question is, what is this makeup of this word Moriah? So the one opinion is that this is the mountain that instruction, literally Hora'ah, Torah, this instruction went out to Am Yisrael. Rashi on the Gemara explains, on Har Bayit there was Lishkat HaGazit, there was a certain point. Like today, right, trying to imagine about the world, right? Mashiach arrives, he'll send up WhatsApp groups, whatever, Mashiach WhatsApp group, imagine such a thing, right? Or whatever. There'll be ways, I don't know, Shidur Chai, there'll be a Shidur Chai to the whole of Israel. But in those days, the prophet gets this prophecy that he has to pass on to Am Yisrael. Where would he do it? Right? So he's got to go to a certain place. You know, like in England, you have these places where they stand up on a certain platform and make these announcements. There's all these kind of things. So the spot was the Beis HaMikdash. Where would he go? Where would the people be? It would be the Beis HaMikdash. So we sit on a certain spot and give over the prophecy that Hashem was bringing to the people. So that's one opinion. There's a second opinion. V'chad amar har she'esam mimenu mor'ah le'umot olam. Totally different opinion. Moriah from the word Morah as in fear. This is the spot that fear goes out to the rest of the world because they see the Beis HaMikdash and they see we connected to Hashem and there's a certain amount of fear that comes along with us. If we turn over the page, let's take a look at our good friend Rashi. Rashi is something over the years I've realized, and this is the beauty of Rashi. It can be on so many different levels. We learn Rashi when we're younger and it seems like it's just helping us understand the Pshat, but as you go on you realize the Chokhmah of Rashi. What is Rashi doing? Rashi is connecting the Torah Shebichtav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And whenever there's a question, and that's the whole thing, right? There's a whole book, Rabbi Victor Bonchik, What's Bothering Rashi? Amazing book. Like, to really know and learn Rashi, you got to think, well, what is the question here? So he's obviously here asking the question, what is this Moriah? But then, to answer the question, Rashi is quoting sources. But what is he picking to quote? Because there's so many midrashim. By the way, this is another whole thing that all the famous midrashim, because Rashi is the one who quoted on their passage, but there's often contradicting midrashim. But there's a chokhmah to understanding Rashi. So let's take a look at Rashi source number 5. I'll read it in the Hebrew, but the English is there. Eretz Moriah. First of all, he tells us Yerushalayim. You understand? Unlike the Gemara, this is Rashi. He first got to tell us what the Torah is referring to. It's telling Yerushalayim. What is later referred to as Yerushalayim. And he has to prove that. Take a look. In Divrei Yamim, it quotes the pasuk. It's not Beit Hashem b'Yerushalayim b'Har Moriah. And the pasuk in Divrei Yamim makes a direct connection. So that is a classic Rashi that he's first giving us when it says Har Moriah. What place is that? Yerushalayim. But now he's getting into the explanation. Meaning he had two questions. If you think about it, I think about what's bothering Rashi. First question is where was this place? Second question is, as the Gemara is asking, what is the meaning behind this name? Now, what's interesting is Rashi is as follows. Let's go through it together. The fourth line there in the Rashi and the Hebrew. V'rabotenu pershu al shem shemisham hora'ah yatz'ah l'Yisrael. In other words, he chooses to take one opinion from the Gemara, and that's what's interesting. He discards, and that's what's interesting, like I said. He discards the second opinion of the Gemara. He takes one opinion. What's that one opinion? The one about the hora'ah. This is the spot that hora'ah goes out to Am Yisrael. Now, what does Rashi do now? He quotes Onkelos. Now we know Rashi. When Rashi often wants to quote a second opinion, what will he call it? Dvar Acher, right? He'll say, there's one opinion, or Dvar Acher, another opinion. But he's not using a Dvar Acherian. I think that's interesting. I'm not convinced you can definitely be Medaik, but to me it makes sense. He's not saying another interpretation, just saying the. He's saying the first opinion from the Gemara in Tanit, and then he says, and Onkelos. So where does Onkelos get it from? Tirgamu al Shem Avodat HaKetoret. Onkelos connects this name of Moriah to the Ketoret. Sheish bo mor neret v'shar b'samim. As we know in Eretz Yisrael, we zocher to say P'tum HaKetoret every single day, not just on Shabbos. And we know the whole list, and it comes from the Psukim in Parshat Kitisa. But the first of the spices in the Ketoret is called mor, okay, which is myrrh. If you look at the English here, myrrh, okay. So, what is Rashi trying to tell us? And this is, if there's a question, what's the question Rashi is asking? I'm My question is, what is Rashi trying to communicate to us by doing this very interesting thing? On the one hand, he's only choosing to take one opinion from the Gemara and then bringing in an onkelos, but not as a separate opinion. He's giving us his two opinions. So this is an idea. It's my idea, but you'll see it then connects to things I heard from Rav Lichtenstein. But the idea in the Rashi is as follows. Hashem is trying to tell us that Yerushalayim is the meeting place, as the title of the shir is called. A meeting place, and we know what is a meeting place. A meeting place, okay, you have all these coffee shops, right? I went to get myself a coffee before. I had a real coffee first, so it was okay. And a lot of times people have this arrangement. My late father, Zichron Livracha, and his late brother, Zichron Livracha, had this. They lived in different sides of Johannesburg, and they had this kavua day, Thursdays, and we get together at a specific place, a coffee shop. So that became, and we all knew this, right? We go to Thursday. My dad was going to Uncle Sally, and they were meeting in this spot. And that became a spot. And when my uncle passed away, it was, there's a certain pathos to this. That there was a spot that a meeting place, but a meeting place means a two-way direction. And I think that's really what Rashi is trying to communicate. That Yerushalayim is the meeting place. But just like we had in the creation of the world, the spot where Hashem creates this physical world. So now, and that's just part of the whole process of Bereshit that we were talking about. Now we have a nation. Now we have Am Yisrael. At this point, is Abraham and Yitzchak creating a new nation. That's going to be a nation that's going to create this two-way meeting place. It's one thing saying this is the point that Hashem created the world. But now we want to say that this is going to be the spot where there's going to be a continuation. Because that's the whole point. I think a lot of people believe Hashem created the world. I think a lot of people in the world, Jewish, non-Jewish, anything, in my very... it was not a scientific survey that I've done, but most of the people I've come across, and I went back to South Africa as a rabbi once again, and I've met people in different places. Most people, I think, in the world, most people do have the sense, there are very few atheists in the sense that most people believe there was a God or some kind of who created the world, but that was it. He created the world and he's gone. He's still there. And the point of Judaism is that there's going to be this constant connection between Hashem in the spiritual world and Am Yisrael, the physical world. But it's going to be a two-way thing, and I think that's what Rashi is trying to communicate to us. On the one hand, and it's interesting he puts it first, this is a place whenever, all the time, Hashem wants to communicate to Am Yisrael and give us a message through our Nevi'im, it's going to be at this spot. It's not going to be at another spot. It's not going to be anywhere else. It's going to be at this spot. But there's a second side to it, and that's why I think he's bringing in onkelos as a together with this and not a separate opinion. He wants to give us a picture that the second part of it, this is the spot that Am Yisrael is going to serve Hashem. And you can say, so why not the korbanot? And there's all this Torah that the Mizbech Hazahav in the Pnimi was on a higher level, and there's all these midrashim that's the Reach Nichoach. The Mizbech Chitzoni is taking an animal and korban. This is just the pure smell, which, as we know as well, the sense of smell is the most spiritual, right? It's not touch, it's not hearing, it's the sense of something a little bit beyond. So that is stage 2. Stage 2, and obviously the event of Akedah and that willingness of Abraham to literally sacrifice, but obviously in the end he didn't. And that moment starting the journey of Am Yisrael, but starting at this point, which is the meeting place in the two different directions. So now let's move on to stage 3, which is Yaakov. If we've got Abraham and Yitzchak in one story, Yaakov's another famous story, and this is where the idea I got from Rav Lichtenstein. So if you take a look at source number 6, a fascinating beginning of Parshat Vayetzei. Obviously, Yaakov is now running away, and the whole Parsha Vayetzei is one whole story. There's no breaks. There's no Parshot. Any lanes will know there's no Parshiot. It's just one long story of him leaving and coming back. 20 years. And we know he gets to a place and he goes to sleep and he has this dream, right? The famous dream of the Sulam. What is the Sulam? It's the, let me quote this inside quickly. We have 10 more minutes, right? So let's take a look. This is the beginning of Parshat Vayetzei, the famous dream. And this really, by the way, begins Sipur Yaakov, okay? The pasuk says he gets to a place V'yitzei Yaakov meBeersheba, v'yelech Haran, also similar journey as from Beersheba. Now he's going. V'yifgad b'makom, he hits a place. Right? V'yilan sham. It's a famous Gemara in Chulin. You might be familiar with it. Rashi quotes part of it. It's a Chulin at Tzadi Aleph, where it says, what's going on here? So the Gemara says he was running off to Ur Kasdim, and he suddenly said, "Hey, I missed the Beit HaMikdash. I missed the place, not the Beit HaMikdash, but the place where Abraham and Yitzchak did the Akedah." So he wanted to go back to be on that spot. And the Gemara is all based on the Gemara. It's all I got it to the Gemara. The Gemara says, so Hashem realized, Hashem helped him and kind of gave him kvitzat haderech. It's one of the examples of kvitzat, all of a sudden brought him back to the spot. That's how all of a sudden he's running away from Beersheba, but all of a sudden he lands in Yerushalayim. By the way, there's all the story. I don't even know, like the middle of the Rav Meidan is this whole thing. That's the middle point of the ladder. But either way, because it's Beitel, and so how we get to Yerushalayim? Either way, that's what the Gemara wants to say. Took him back to this spot. He has this dream. What is the dream? The land, the dream is clearly this idea of a connection between the physical and the spiritual. There's all the famous midrashim about it. But after the dream, we have this pasuk here on source number 6. But first of all, there's like this wall, but like not fear, as in like, but like this awe. Ma nora makom hazeh. I didn't realize where I was sleeping. Ein ze ki im beit Elokim v'ze shar hashamayim. So Rav Lichtenstein in the Sikha on Friday night on Parshat Vayetzei, it must be 30 plus years ago, and it's something I remembered and I wrote it down. He says, classic Rav Lichtenstein, people are familiar as being a student of Rav Soloveitchik, everything's a duality, right? Everything's two sides. This, Rav Lichtenstein felt that this pasuk is expressing the duality of this place. It's on the one hand, Beit Elokim, it's a place for Hashem to dwell in this world, okay? And if going back to what we said in the Chiddush and Rashi, it's the place of Hashem to dwell in the world. What does that mean? Right? We grew up with the song Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem Hashem's everywhere, even in Hawaii. Right? So what does it mean? The point is, this is the concentration. This is the Shekhinah. The very word Shekhinah means a concentration of Hashem's presence. This is his bite. But at the same time, it's a Shar Hashamayim. It's the stairway to heaven, right? You know, and there's that statue, you know, the Sulam Yaakov is literally a stairway by Givat Mordechai there at the bottom. Ramban, source number 7, he kind of incorporates what Rav Lichtenstein built it from here. If you take a look, what does it mean? Ki Beit Shemaim, Hu Beit HaMikdash. So it's the Beit HaMikdash. Hu Shar Lalot Misham Tefilot v'Korbanot Shemaim. But it's also the place that we bring up korbanot, but he adds in here the word tefillot. So I want to end off with stage 4, which is really Shlomo and the halacha. We'll do this more outside. But Shlomo, when he is the first one to build the Beit HaMikdash, as you see it in the picture, and it's source number 8, it's a perik of Malachim Aleph perik Chet. Just look at the first psukim at the bottom of that page. Az Amar Shlomo Hashem Amar Lishchon Barafel Banot Baniti Beit Zvul Lecha Machol Shitachal Lamim. You wanted a place to dwell in this world. I've built for you a place. So Rav Lichtenstein was saying that's expressing the Beit Elokim, Hashem coming down to this world. But then if you turn over the page, on the top of the second last page, it says V'yamod Shlomo Lifnei Mizbach. Oh, sorry, there's another typo there. It's supposed to be a gap between Mizbach Hashem. He stood by the altar, the Mizbach. Neged Kokal V'yifros Kapav Hashamayim. So Rav Lichtenstein was connecting these psukim of Shlomo to Beit Elokim Mishar Hashamayim. Shlomo himself realized we built a home, a place for you to come into this world, but this is the spot where Am Yisrael is going to send everything up to Shamayim, not just a korbanot, but also tefillah. And that's a famous psukim. If you take a look, and we'll look at the Gemara in a second, but it talks about davening to Hashem, Yitpalu al makom hazeh in Lamed Hey, in Mem Daled, Yitpalu Hashem derech ha'ir. It's clear that Moshe is saying, Shlomo is saying, now that I built the Beit HaMikdash, this is the spot. And wherever Am Yisrael is going to daven to, they're going to daven to this spot. Today it's kind of easy with like satellites and what have you. It's like the tefillot literally come to this spot, and from here they go up to Shomai. Okay, when I do bar mitzvahs, I say to the families, this is the local call, you get it? This is the local call directly to Hashem. So let's end off with the halacha. I think what's nice to see, if we look at these 4 different stages, number 1, creation of the world, the meeting of the spiritual and the physical, Abraham and Yitzchak going to Eretz HaMoriah, once again these 2 directions. Yaakov, also referring it to Beit Elokim and Shar Shamayim, and the final stage being Shlomo. But what's nice, out of Shlomo's words comes the halacha. What's beautiful, and this is also my connection to Rav Soloveitchik, is very much trying to see these concepts in halacha. And you guys are familiar with this, but there's a certain chiddush here. If you take a look at the Gemara on source number 9, it's a famous Gemara, Brachot Lamed. The Gemara starts, Tal Rabbanan, Suma, somebody who's blind and could not, before the age of Waze and GPSs and whatever, and you're in the middle of the desert and it's cloudy, you don't know where you're going. What's the first thing you do? So your heart, right? So you're in a place and for whatever reason you do not know which way is Yerushalayim, just daven to Hashem. And it quotes the pasuk there, Yitpalu el Hashem. But if you look at the second part of the Gemara there, we just scroll down to the Hebrew part, the second part there. This is the famous Gemara, and once again paralleling the Midrash. If you're in Chutz La'aretz, you're standing up in Maui, where my daughter is, or you're in Melbourne, or you're in Johannesburg, or you're in New York, or you're in London, right? What do? Yechaben et libo. Now what's the problem here? The Gemara seems to continue using what it was referring to before, it's just your heart. Libo keneged Eretz Yisrael. And it quotes the psukim from Shlomo. If you scroll down, Hayal Me'ed Eretz Yisrael, Yechaben libo keneged Yerushalayim. If you're in Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't matter where you are. The Golan, Kiryat Shmona, Eilat, you face Yerushalayim. Okay, Hayal Me'ed Be Yerushalayim, Yechaben libo keneged Beit HaMikdash. You're sitting here in this shul, you're facing toward the base of Mikdash. Hayalmid b'Beit HaMikdash, Yechaben libo keneged Beit Kodesh Kodeshim. But the Gemara continues. Hayalmid b'Beit Kodesh Kodeshim, Yechaben libo keneged Beit HaKaporet. You've got to be facing literally the top of the Aron Kodesh with the Kruvim. Hayalmid achrei yireh atzmo ki'ilu lifnei. You've got to be in front. Now this is what's important. Take a look at the last. It's just the last line of the Hebrew of that paragraph. Nimtza. What does this mean? Says the Gemara. Omed b'mizrach machzir panav l'marav. You remember the whole thing about because I'm in Europe and the shuls went this way, and then even Johannesburg sometimes they do that just because that was on Europe. No, it's got to be if you in the mizrach you got to face the marav, but marav machzir panav l'mizrach. This is the famous line. Bedarom machzir panav l'tzafon. Betzom mizrach nimtzau. This is a very important line. The last line of that paragraph. Nimtzau. Kol Yisrael machavnim et libam lemakom echad. What does that mean? All of Am Yisrael, and once again, we can think about Jews all over the world, wherever there's a Beit Chabad, right? And they're all getting up to daven. Yes, it's different times. And Melbourne right now is Mariv maybe, and Hawaii they haven't even got up yet. But whenever people daven, the tefillot come here, they connect here, and from there they go up to Shammai. If you turn over the page, the last line for the Gemara is really nice. Also, Amar Rav Avin v'Itema Rav Avia. It's the Hebrew in the middle here. Ma'ikra kemigdal David tzavarecha banui letal piot. The Shchunat Tal Piot is named from this pasuk, a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Tel shekol piot ponim bo. Isn't that beautiful? The mountain, Tel is a mount that all mouths face. What's interesting is the Tosfot. Tosfot comes along and says, it seems to be a stira, there's a direct contradiction in this Gemara, because it starts off by saying, if you don't know the directions, you just direct your heart. And then the next part it says, if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you direct your heart to Eretz Yisrael. But the end of the Gemara says clearly what? If you look at the end of the Gemara, it says, Machzir Panav. It's talking about literally physical facing. In other words, there seems to be a contradiction. Is the Gemara talking about if you're in New York and you're facing Jerusalem, is that just in your heart you're facing Jerusalem, or you're literally facing Jerusalem? It seems to be a contradiction in the Gemara. So how does Tosfot solve the contradiction? Source number 10. What does he do? Takes out the word. Okay, he had a different girsa. In other words, according to the Tosfot, all the way along, the Torah is referring to physical facing, except, of course, where you don't know the direction. That was libo, but everything else, literally face, keneged Eretz Yisrael, v'lo gasin libo. We're talking about literal facing, and that's what the end of the Braita is talking about. So according to Tosfot, it's only referring to literally physical facing. How does the halacha do it? Take a look. This is Gavaldik. It's a very rare situation. I've seen the Shulchan Aruch kind of connects to everything. Take a look at source number 11. The Shulchan Aruch. So this is Shulchan Aruch or Rechaim Tzadidalad, right in the beginning, Aleph. Whenever you get up to daven, and when the halach is talking about tefillah, it's referring to Amida. Whenever you're getting up to daven Amida, once again, wherever you are, im hayah omed b'chutz la'aretz, yachzir panav. So the Tosfot following Tosfot. You literally face Eretz Yisrael. That's what it is. You New York, Melbourne, whatever it is. The shul has to, or you have to be facing Eretz Yisrael. But what does he add? V'yichaven gam liYerushalayim u'lemikdash u'lebatei kodesh kodeshim. In other words, when you, and this is halakha l'maisa, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's, if you don't always think about it, but it's a nice point in halakha l'maisa that when you are in Melbourne or New York, or for that matter in Baka, and you're facing towards Yerushalayim, so you can only physically face the general direction, you understand? But when the Gemara does these concentric circles, which we also saw in the Midrash, it means physically you're facing here towards the general direction of the Old Sea, but in your mind, you're facing to the base of Midrash and the Kodesh Kodeshim. Just look at the Mishnah Berurah there, we'll end off with this. What does it mean, B'chavein? What does that mean? It's really combining the facing and the libo. Because take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. When you get up in New York, you're facing the general direction of Eretz. There's no way you can say this is the spot, or even from here you can't say this is my direction. I'm facing this way and this way. No, you're facing the general direction. Okay. Once again, but when you daven Amida, you really got to imagine that what? In your feelings and intellectually. You are standing in the makom of the Beit HaMikdash, Asher b'Yerushalayim b'makom Kodesh Kodeshim. So basically, information, this is a very, 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 very powerful spot. It is a spot where the world was created. It's a spot the Avot realized this two-way connection, and it means to this day, and we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. On Beis Hashem, we will have a Beis HaMikdash. But to this day, this is the spot of our connection. Hashem coming to us, and us coming to Hashem, and the tefillot. And literally, when we get up to daven, it's something to try and inculcate into our lives. When we get up to daven the Amida, to face this. So, first of all, once again, it was lovely being here and sharing this with you. And I think, once again, going back to the story I started with, we are post 67, and we have a big zchut. And I think for you guys, literally live in Yerushalayim. It's nice for me to say I'm in the greater Yerushalayim area, but you literally live. It's a big zchut. You're living literally in the center of the world. If you go back to the analogy, you're in the stadium all the time. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll be able to appreciate that all the time, continue it, and really see the Beis HaMikdash Meher B'Ameinu. Amen. Right.
So what is your daughter doing in Maui?
That is a good question. Yeah. Like always, some Israeli has decided he can make good money in Maui.
So, what is she doing there?